What's going on, guys? This is David with Random Tech Tips, and I have finally finished benchmarking the new Ryzen 2200G with 14 of the most popular games on the market right now so that you can see exactly what type of performance that you can expect if you're looking at buying one of these new APUs. So what makes these benchmarks any different than what you're already seeing on YouTube? Well, first, I have a few titles that I've benchmarked that I haven't seen anywhere else. The first being Assassin's Creed Origins, World of Warcraft, and also Team Fortress 2. Secondly, and I think most importantly, is I'm benchmarking all of these games at both 4 gigabytes of DDR4 2400 megahertz memory and 8 gigabytes of dual channel DDR4 2400 megahertz memory. Most of the YouTube channels right now are doing all of their benchmarks with either 3200 megahertz or 3000 megahertz memory, which is ideal, but just something that many of you may not already have on hand. Sure, I get it. Nobody in their right mind is going to build a brand new gaming PC with only 4 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, especially using a Ryzen chip that sees drastic performance improvement with dual channel memory. But there could always be someone out there that is still waiting out the Ramageddon with that single stick of DDR4 memory in their setup. And this video is for you. Okay, since this is my first video showing benchmarks, let's go through my testing methods. For my test bench, I'm running the MSI B350 Tomahawk motherboard updated with the latest driver that supports the new Raven Ridge APUs. I've got one 4GB stick of Crucial Ballistics Sport DDR4 memory running at 2400 MHz. I've also got the 2200G with the stock Wraith cooler and a 500GB Samsung 850 EVO SSD for my drive. For my benchmarking programs, I use Fraps, MSI Afterburner, and Frafs with an F. The statistics I measured for these benchmarks are average frames per second, 1% lows, and 0.1% lows. While max and min frames were captured, I agree with the rest of the benchmarking community that they don't necessarily provide very meaningful insight. For each game, I would record data for 10 minutes, not including any cutscenes if the games had them. I did my best to stay as consistent as possible in the games that allowed it. However, multiplayer titles were really just me playing the game. So I feel that data is pretty representative of what you can expect when you're playing. I did 3 runs for each game using Fraps and 3 more runs using MSI Afterburner as my logging system. I then averaged the results to account for any variance in the benchmarking programs, and that's the data that you'll see here. Because I don't have a capture card, I didn't want to introduce a screen recording software into the equation. I do not have any actual footage of gameplay during benchmarking, but this is something that I'll be investing in the future, but for now, you're just going to have to make do with the numerical results. If you're interested in seeing actual gameplay footage, let me know which games you want to see in the comments, and I'll make a separate video showing those results. But for now, let's get to the benchmarks. Please note that these results are only for one 4 GB stick of DDR4 RAM running at 2400 MHz. I will be posting the results of testing 8 GB of dual channel DDR RAM running at 2400 MHz in another video that I will link in the description when I release it, hopefully as soon as tomorrow. Alright, so the games I looked at are League of Legends, Team Fortress 2, Rocket League, Overwatch, World of Warcraft, CSGO, Minecraft with an E, Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, Destiny 2, Assassin's Creed Origins, Kingdom Come Deliverance, Call of Duty World War II, and PUBG. The orange graph shows average frames per second, and blue shows the 1% lows. I have not included the 0.1% lows in these results just as a way to keep it less cluttered. This first graph shows the lowest default settings for each game running at 1080p resolution, so that also means no scaling down to 720p in games that allowed it. I kept this consistent with all the benchmarks at every different quality setting. Okay, so looking at this graph, we can see the average frame rates when all of the settings are on stock low for all of these games. League of Legends 103 frames per second with only 4 gigabytes of RAM is extremely surprising, but it is a very well optimized game. Playing through it, I had absolutely no issues whatsoever. TF2, 64 average frames per second. Again, it was a very smooth experience, even on Rocket League, although some of the textures were kind of hard to see and it was hard to make out some of the plays. It still ran smoothly at 55 frames per second. Same thing with Overwatch and World of Warcraft. CSGO, it was a little bit more stuttery, it seemed like when I was playing it, but still at 46 frames per second, it worked just fine. So Fortnite and Minecraft are both at the 30 to 40 frame per second range, which I would consider kind of playable. However, both of them, you'll see their 1% lows was 1. They had a really big issue with stuttering throughout my entire playthroughs, to the point where I would actually consider them unplayable because of how many times they would stutter. Rainbow Six Siege played okay at the low settings, but again, because that is a shooter which relies on having quick reflexes, I wouldn't recommend it, especially if you're trying to be competitive. Destiny 2, Assassin's Creed Origins, and Kingdom Come Deliverance were all unplayable in my opinion, even though they were running, which was surprising with only 4 gigabytes of RAM, especially Destiny and Assassin's Creed because they are pretty newer titles. They weren't running to the point where you could play them or be competitive by any means. Call of Duty World War II and PUBG both would not launch on the lowest settings. So the 4 gigabytes of system RAM, again, 2 gigabytes of that was being used by the 2200G, but that just wasn't enough to get the game up and running. So bumping up the settings to stock medium for all these games, most of them play pretty playable actually, except for World of Warcraft, which almost gets cut in half, which is extremely surprising. But League of Legends, again, still over 60 frames per second. TF2 was still very playable. Rocket League, a little bit less playable at this point, and I would probably not recommend it to anybody trying to be competitive. Overwatch was fine. Again, the degrade, anything 40 and above, I felt was fine as far as playing. CSGO, again, it was kind of stuttery, so I don't know if the 44 frames per second actually does it justice. But again, Minecraft and Fortnite, they had serious issues with stuttering to the point where I would consider them, even though Minecraft has okay frame rates, as completely unplayable. Rainbow Six Siege, once it got below 30 frames per second, definitely not playable. In Destiny and Assassin's Creed Origins, again, just too much stuttering to where it became unplayable. In these settings, Kingdom Come Deliverance actually failed to launch, so it joined our list with Call of Duty World War II and PUBG. Alright, so bumping up to high settings. So keep in mind some titles have ultra settings capabilities, but just for the sake of consistency, I just did stock high settings on every game. League of Legends still coming in strong with 69 average frames per second. So again, buttery smooth while I was playing, had absolutely no issues playing League of Legends. TF2 I would consider playable at these frame rates. However, if you're trying to be competitive, probably not going to do it for you. Rocket League at this point just became unplayable. Overwatch, again, if you're trying to be competitive, probably not going to work for you, but it is playable. World of Warcraft, you get into those higher populated cities, not going to do very well. I didn't actually go through a highly populated city, but just going through the countryside, getting as low as 17, it's obviously not going to work. CSGO, again, just thinking about being competitive, probably not going to happen at 35 frames per second. Minecraft remains unplayable, although it was able to launch just because of the stuttering. Fortnite surprisingly failed to launch at high settings, so it joined our list along with Destiny 2 and then Assassin's Creed, and then all of the other ones that were already on the list. Rainbow Six Siege, while it would launch, again, it just remained completely unplayable at 16 frames per second. So here is just a chart summarizing all of the findings, just crammed all together in one, so I apologize for how cluttered it looks. So our green bars are our average frame per second on low settings. Our blue bars are our frames per second on medium, and our Orange bars are our average frame per second on high. So anytime you see a 0, that just shows that the game failed to launch. So Call of Duty and PUBG and all 3 of our tests failed to launch. Kingdom Come Deliverance wasn't able to launch at medium and high settings. But in general, what I experienced through these benchmarks is that the only game that really is going to run well or be playable, at least at a competitive level, on only 4 gigabytes of system RAM with this 2200G is League of Legends. So if League of Legends is the only game that you're playing, then you can absolutely get by with just 1 stick of DDR4 memory, even at 2400 megahertz. So you don't need the 3000 or 3200 megahertz that we're seeing elsewhere. Most of the other titles, while are playable, are probably not playable at competitive frame rates. So if you're just sitting at home and you're playing by yourself and you're not planning on playing online or playing with friends, you can probably get away with it. However, again, if you're trying to be competitive by any means in any of these games, then the frame rates aren't going to do it for you, even at lower settings. Keep in mind, guys, that all of these games were tested at 1080p. So some of these frame rates could actually be a little bit better if they were tested at 720p, which is something that I plan to do in a follow-up video after I get the 2400G tested and when I get all these games tested with 8 gigabytes of dual channel memory as well. So that's going to be it for this video, guys. I appreciate the patience. I know I promised to get these benchmarks up earlier in the week when the chips launched. However, I just ran into so many different issues, from not having a current Ryzen chip to upgrade my BIOS to all the driver and support issues that all the other tech YouTubers were experiencing. These benchmarks took a lot of time to get, and that's not including the editing of the video and the creation of all the graphs as well. So if you found this helpful, please hit that like button. It really helps. If you want to see my next round of benchmarks and how they compare to these 4 gigabyte benchmarks, go ahead and hit that subscribe button to get notified when my next video launches. If you have other games you want me to benchmark, go ahead and leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to add them to the list as well. I want to give a shout out to all my new subscribers and just to say thank you. Until next time, I'll tech you later.